Welcome. Can you all hear me, or are you all settled down? Have we got the right thumbnail now? Have we got the right title? Live streaming's confusing, guys. It's complicated. You think it'd be easy to just, click a button and broadcast your voice all over the place, but it's complicated. You gotta click all these buttons, and you gotta click them in the right sequence, and if you get, it's a puzzle, it's a riddle, wrapped in a conundrum. It's hard, guys, but I think we got it working, and I think we are ready to discuss the 51st episode of Game of Thrones, called Arya for a Game of Thrones. And this episode of Ultra Text, we're going to be efficient this time. Just to warn you, we're gonna be sticking to the text. We're gonna be on track. We're gonna have no tangents, and we're gonna efficiently summarize it quickly. We're gonna put the bridge back in Abridged. It's gonna be great. How are you all though? I'm gonna glance at the chat. How are you? You've got snacks, you look settled, great. So let's get into it. So, we pan in, we zoom down from a bird's eye view, and we have a sweeping, expensive CGI camera shot of the camera dancing out above the Red Keep and then going, and then you see Syrio Forel, and you see Arya Stark, and they are training with their wooden swords. So Syrio Forel is, of course, the quote-unquote dancing master who's teaching Arya how to fight with a sword and many other things besides. And so Syrio's going like, whoop, up, left, down, right, and then Arya's responding to those sword attacks. Syrio's attacking from different directions, and then Arya's defending from those different directions. Left and right and up and pirouette and upside down. It's like DDR. All these instructions are coming fast. It's like Guitar Hero. It's like whoop, 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 all these bing, bang, bong, and then Arya's got to respond correctly, or else she can't use the blue star mode to get the extra points on the Guitar Hero. Sword fighting is basically Guitar Hero. A guitar is symbolically a sword, right? Either a sword or a penis, depending on your sort of Freudian perspective. But it's the battle that men bear onto the stage to try and sort of wave it about and thereby prove their superiority or something. I think that's not quite Arya's approach, though, is it? She hasn't quite got that sort of I want to be the very best masculine thing. I think she's more of a pragmatist, isn't she? Or, well, maybe not even that for sword fighting at Arya at this stage. Perhaps Arya, I mean, she wants to have a sword as a symbol of her sort of independence. But also I think, she just got some kind of natural love for the thing. She has a natural inclination towards sword fighting and towards adventuring and towards some of those more masculine things. I wonder if it's got something to do with no, probably not. Look, anyway, we're on task. So Arya's playing DDR with Syrio Forel, but then Syrio Forel says left, and then he swings his sword right, which you're not meant to do in DDR. It's like if it had an up arrow, but then when you press up, it says, nope, you actually should have pressed down. That's pretty bullshit for a game. But Syrio Forel has some smart-ass explanation for it. So he... But Arya, by the way, is pretty good at this now. Arya is quite good at the DDR. You can't even see her legs, how fast she's pressing all the arrows. Like, she's playing Guitar Hero, can't even see her fingers. It's going tap, 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 taps. It's bad for the plastic, is how good she is at Guitar Hero. She's doing, like, Through the Fire and the Flames on insane difficulty. She's really good at Guitar Hero with the sword. So Arya has benefited from a training montage or two here. We've only seen, like, a couple of Arya's lessons, but she's clearly had many more than that. Because Arya is getting quite skilled at the old sword training stuff. Because a montage is the most powerful tool in making someone good at something in fiction, of course. But then Syrio does the lie. He says left, then he swings right, and Arya gets hit. She gets bruised. Because in this game, if you miss a DDR point, you don't only lose points, you get a bloody wooden sword smack you in the noggin, and that's not fun for anyone. So she gets hurt, but instead of reacting like, I don't like injuries, she thinks, oh, a bruise is a lesson. Right? And a lesson makes me better. So she's got a very healthy attitude towards obstacles and pitfalls and bad things happening. She recognizes the value in shit going badly. But she's a bit concerned by the old fucking Deceptoroo that Sirio did by swinging right when he said left. Arya says, you cheated. You said left and you went right. What's all that about? And then Sirio explains that, well, I said my words lied. I said the wrong thing, but my body made it clear as day that I was going right. And what you should be doing is looking at the body, at the reality, at the physicality, not at people's words. Because people's words can be full of lies, but their body will speak the truth. And this is about Sirio's whole thing of like true sight, of like, ooh, like, don't see what you expect to see what's really there. Using your senses and your perception, because your senses don't lie. Your eyes don't lie. And anyone who's studied, like, perception knows that that's bullshit, right? Like your senses and your perceptions construct your reality in a whole bunch of ways. They fill in blanks, they make up shapes, and all of that is based on your expectations and your knowledge and a whole bunch of other things, all these little perceptual little rules of thumb. What's the term for a rule of thumb? It's there's a cool word for it, but anyway, Sirio's like, nah, look, you've got to use your eye holes and nothing else, and that's the right way to perceive the world. But there's also another important lesson in here. When Arya says, like, you cheated, that's kind of like, welcome to Westeros, right? Because, like, in just the previous chapter, Arya's father, Ned, just got cheated, just had Littlefinger betray him, and that's the nature of the Game of Thrones, right? That's the nature of the world and the story that they're living in. People cheat, people lie, people betray. So Arya is getting to see that lesson and come to terms with the lesson that people will betray her in a safe environment where she can learn the lesson and be ready for it when she comes later. Arya is fortunate enough to get some very useful training here early in her arc. Training that Ned Stark probably could have benefited from. And then Sirio goes on to tell a story that sort of illustrates his ideas about perception and true sight and stuff. And he talks about how he was first sword to the Sea Lord of Braavos. So Syrio Forel was a Bravosi from the city of Braavos in Essos, and the first sword is apparently some kind of important position for someone who's good at fighting. It's not really clear if this first sword is like a bodyguard to the Sea Lord, or if he's like a military leader of some kind, or if it's more of like a ceremonial thing even. Maybe it's kind of like the Kingsguard in Westeros, but we don't really know. In any case, the first sword is meant to be someone who's really good at sticking people with pointy things, and so Syrio got to have that position years ago. And he talks about how he tells the story of how he became the first sword of Braavos. And he talks about how the Sea Lord, he was really into like fruity exotic animals. He had a little zoo in his little Braavos hut. He had like giraffes, and he had like pigs as big as cows, and he had tigers that carry their cubs in a pouch. So some kind of feline kangaroo sounds pretty great. These are all these like fictional animals that exist in George Martin's world of Ice and Fire. He also mentions terrible walking lizards with scythes for claws, which is like, shit, man. Are there velociraptors in this book? Are there velociraptors? Fuck! It's like Jurassic Park. Is it velociraptors? Which ones are the ones that have the big ol' foot claws? They have teeth on their feet. There's a dinosaur with teeth on their feet. I can't remember what it's called. Is it the velociraptors? I think it's the velociraptors, like in Jurassic Park. Those guys might be down in like Sothios or something, because remember, like, there's this whole big geography to the world of Ice and Fire, right? And like you got sort of Westeros, which is like medieval Europe, and then you got like Essos, which is sort of like quote unquote the foreign place, and then you've got like Ulthos down to like the far southeast, which we don't really know anything about, but it seems kind of desolate. And then in the sort of middle south, you've got Sothayos, which is like it's like sort of jungly and abandoned temple-y and froggy and diseasey and a bit sort of spooky. I reckon that is where the Velociraptors probably are. Here be Velociraptors is probably what's going on in Sothayos. Is Sothayos? Is that how you pronounce it? The whole Westeros, Essos, Sothayos thing, it's cute, but it's a bit ugly to say, I think, in my opinion. Anyway, so Syrio talks about how, like, so the Sea Lord of Braavos was looking for a new first sword. He was hiring. He put out some applications on he posted a job on Upwork and on Recruit Now and all of those other websites that they advertise on the podcasts. He wanted to find the best applicant he could possibly get to fill the position of first sword. And the test that he applied to all of these blokes who wanted to be the first sword was that he welcomed them into his room and he had a cat on his lap, and he'd say, "Oh, have you ever seen a creature that looks so strange and magnificent as this wondrous cat beast creature?" And Syrio Forel, when he came in, he was just like, "That's a bloody cat, mate. It's just an ordinary cat." Whereas all of the previous people who wanted to be the first sword were all like, "Oh, what a marvelous, magnificent beast. Its toes are so shiny, its head is so wiry, its tail is so curly, woo!" Because they were expecting some, like, strange, exotic beast, because they knew from reputation that the Sea Lord kept all these magnificent, strange creatures, whereas Syrio was able to forgo his expectations and just use his senses to identify that is a bloody cat, mate. And thereby Syrio demonstrated to the Sea Lord of Braavos that he had good perception and good intuition, and therefore he should be the first lord, whatever that means. And again, I think it's very questionable, this whole sort of notion of intuitive seeing what's truly there, as opposed to, like, basing your perception on your expectations and stuff. I'm not sure if that's something that you can just turn off. But anyway, Syrio advocates it, and he finishes his story. He tells us, "The heart lies and the head plays tricks with us, but the eyes see true. So look with your eyes, and then comes the thinking, and in that way knowing the truth." And Arya says, "Just so." So Arya is definitely internalizing and agreeing with the lessons that Syrio is teaching her. And then Syrio mentions, and by the way, like, when we get up to Winterfell, I reckon you can use needle, finally. I reckon you can use some actual steel. We can start practicing with real weapons as opposed to wooden weapons. So Arya's getting better, and Syrio's ready to take their training to the next level, take the training wheels off her sword, and put her on the old Nimbus 2000. It's also interesting that Syrio is confirming here that the plan is for Syrio to go north to Winterfell with Arya, which again kind of throws into doubt, not that it wasn't already in doubt, but it sort of heaps more doubt on to the idea that, like, Syrio Forel is secretly Jaqen H'ghar. Like, would Jaqen H'ghar really be willing to travel to the other side of Westeros when he's got other shit he needs to do down south? You'd think not. But anyway, So Arya's excited and happy, and her training's going well, and Syrio's this great guy. So Arya's now in this state of, like, all's well, but then knock knock, misfortune comes knocking, and misfortune does not knock politely, does not sort of go, "Oh, hello, I'm Misfortune. Would you like to browse my wares?" She's like an Avon calling lady. Misfortune says, like, "Would you like to buy some bad things into your life? I've got so much on offer." No, that's not how Misfortune comes. Misfortune knocks down the door with the battering ram. She bursts in, an unwelcome guest, and just like starts eating out of your fridge, and just like leaving all this mess all over the place and just putting dirty feet on your couch. That's how misfortune comes into your life. She's got no regard for good timing. She's got no regard for what you're doing. Misfortune bursts in this case, into Arya's life in the form of Meryn Trant and a few other Lannister blokes in red cloaks. Blokes in red cloaks is the name of their club. And they come in and they say, yo, Arya Stark, you need to come with us. Meryn Trant is very into these extended, like that. That's how he talks. And Syrio's like, come with me. We got some fun, important stuff to do. And I was like, sure. But then Syrio's like, nah, whoa. Why would Ned Stark be sending Lannister men to pick up Arya Stark? That doesn't really make any sense. What's going on here? Syrio detects that some kind of mischief is afoot, and so he says, what's up? And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, Ned Stark wouldn't send Lannisters to pick me up. He'd send Stark blokes. So what's happening here, boyos? I don't have to go with you. And then Meryn Trant's like, man, I'm a Kingsguard. You got to do what I say, man. Check your privilege. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. I don't know why Meryn Trant is so urban. Is that the euphemism that they use? But that's how he speaks. I'm just reading what's on the text, guys, word for word, verbatim. And then Meryn Trant's like, put down your stick. We're gonna go like footsie fightsy if we have to. Like this is gonna go down, and it's not gonna go down well for you. I'm a Kingsguard. And then Arya's like, well, you know, the Kingslayer was a Kingsguard, and he killed the Mad King who he swore to protect, so I guess you guys ain't shit, huh? So Arya's getting pretty sassy. Like, Arya's turning the sass up to 11. And then they're like, all right, fine, screw this. Let's just grab the girl and go. And then for a moment, Arya's afraid. She thinks fear cuts deeper than swords. And fear cuts deeper than swords is a sort of a mantra that she repeats a lot. She's got all these cute little lines that Syrio Forel taught her that she repeats throughout the series. Quiet as a shadow, quick as a snake, calm as still water. All these different little lines that summarize Syrio's lessons, and that she not only uses to, guide her behavior, but she also it's like a sort of a way to sort of gather herself and center herself and calm herself, like a sort of meditation mantra type thing, which is interesting. And so the men approach Arya, and then Syrio Forel stands in the way, and he's like, yeah, nah, you can't have her. And they're like, get out of my way, you bald-faced, bloody nincompoop. And then he's like, hey, I'm no nincompoop. I'm Syrio Forel, mate. Like, check my card. I'm the first sword of Bravos. I'm like, you need to speak to me with respect, because I'm important, mate. And they call him a bold bastard, and he smacks him on the helmet with his wooden sword, and then they pull out their actual swords. And then he breaks the guy's hand with his wooden sword. So Syrio's at a pretty great disadvantage using, a wooden sword as opposed to a real sharp sword. But TLDR, he beats the crap out of these like 4 or so Lannister guardsmen, because he's so fast and he's so quick and he's so skilled and he's so precise. So he like breaks one guy's hand, and takes out one of the guy's eyes, and then tricks one of the guys into cutting one of the other guys in half, and he really just like ninjas the crap out of them. He's like blinking all over the place. He's all over them. It's a mess. It's ugly. It's not good for the Lannisters. So Syrio beats up these blokes, and he's moving incredibly fast. Like, Syrio's really an impressive character. It's like, that bit in is it Mega Man X? There's that really great video. I haven't played Mega Man X, but there's this really great video by Egoraptor. Do any of you guys know Egoraptor? He's this amazing animator, or he used to be an amazing animator until he decided he wanted to be like a rap artist instead. He hasn't put out an animation in years. But Egoraptor used to make this amazing online video stuff. Well, some of it amazing, but he made this series called Sequelitis, and it's like an analysis of video games, and it's a really well put together piece of analysis and explanation, really good communication. And he analyzes video games, including Mega Man X, and I think it's one of the Mega Mans. But the Mega Man, the way it starts is that you start out as like this weak character who can't really do much, and in the first level you start to learn how to like put together the basic gameplay mechanics and how to fight and how to do stuff like that. But at the start you're pretty weak, and you know that you're weak, and at the end of the first level you have to fight this big boss man who basically beats the crap out of you. But then you get like saved by this other, more powerful version of yourself. Like I don't know the lore. I don't know. I don't know Mega Man lore, but this like big like fighting good guy comes along and saves you, and he's like really powerful. He's like a way more leveled up version of you. And as you progress through the game later on, you get to gain some of the powers that this other guy had, and you get to like eventually get to his point, up to his level. But at the start of the game, when you're weak, you sort of look in awe of this more powerful version of you and go like, wow, like I want to strive to be that great out of 8. And that's sort of what this moment is for Arya, right? Because right now she's only just begun her journey into becoming more skilled and more able and more competent. And then when she looks up at Sirio Farrell, who's this incredibly like fast, agile, skilled, accomplished fighter, but she can recognize herself in him, right? To the extent that he's using the skills that he taught her. You know, she is on the path to become like him. And so when she looks at Sirio Farrell, she's not only looking at a greater fighter, she's looking at a potential version of herself. You know, an idol, a role model, a goal who she wants to become like. This is her Mega Man X. So she wants to be like Sirio Farrell. But, however powerful Sirio Farrell is, he has a bit of trouble with a whole bunch of properly armed blokes. So he does beat up the Lannisters without too much trouble, but then Meryn Trant approaches. And Meryn Trant is fully armoured in head to toe. Like, the Lannister blokes were pretty lightly armoured, so it wasn't that hard beating them up with a wooden sword. Meryn Trant is fully armoured head to toe, and he's actually a semi-competent fighter, I think. So this presents a problem for Sirio. My question here is, why doesn't Sirio Farrell just pick up one of the swords from the Lannister guards? There's a whole bunch of blades just sitting on the ground, which Sirio surely could just pick up, you know, with all of his agility and all of his speed. And surely that would give him a much better chance against Meryn Trant than the wooden sword does. But for whatever reason... Oh, the reason is because he's secretly Jaqen H'ghar. No, for whatever reason, he only stands with his wooden sword, and he says, alright, I'm not going to run, I'm not going to flee, I'm proud. Sirio Farrell is very proud, and he just says, Arya, girl, run away, be safe, I'm going to make the heroic Boromir sacrifice. This is a lot like the breaking of the Fellowship. Is that what it's called? The breaking of the Fellowship? It's when, in The Lord of the Rings, when, Aragorn and Frodo and Gandalf and all those great blokes, well, Gandalf was gone at that point, but the Fellowship was traveling, and near, like, the Anduin, there was this one point where they all get attacked by a Uruk-hai, and this is like the moment where it's almost like the moment where the first act of The Lord of the Rings ends, because the existing group, the existing social order gets cleft in twain, and all these groups get like flung off in different directions of The Lord of the Rings. For the whole story so far, the Fellowship had been together, but at the breaking of the Fellowship, they all get attacked, they get overrun, and they have to split off. Aragorn goes off with Legolas and Gimli, and Frodo goes off with Sam, and Merry goes off with Pippin, and everyone gets splintered, and then they get sent off on their own adventures, which are their whole own arcs and storylines, and their own challenges and tribulations and complications. That's sort of what these last few chapters are for Game of Thrones. It's the breaking of the Fellowship. It's when the Stark family gets all split up and flung off to these different areas of Westeros. Arya gets sent off with the Night's Watch. Sansa gets stuck in King's Landing, and Robb is off battling, and Bran and Rickon go and do their things. Everyone gets split up. It's like the breaking of the Fellowship, and Boromir is the one who stays and stands and defends as the rest of the Fellowship breaks up. In order to make up for him being a bit of a douche earlier. But regardless, Boromir makes a heroic sacrifice. And that's what Sirio Farrell does here. And so the rest of the Fellowship, throughout their fight, they remember Boromir's sacrifice, his heroism. You got to question the whole notion of the heroic sacrifice, letting yourself die so that everyone else lives. So, people love that for some reason, don't they? People love the heroic sacrifice, but I mean, just sort of logistically, I'm not all that sure it's all that useful all that often, right? I mean, I guess you can busy up the bad guy by fighting them for a bit, but, not always for long, and sometimes you might do better by, running with your friend or something, maybe, and protecting them or something. I'm just saying, like, when push comes to shove, don't be all that keen to give away your life. I mean, just, it probably won't come up, though, so don't worry about it. So Arya runs away and leaves Syrio to his fate with Meryn Trant. And we never see Syrio die, so maybe he's still alive somewhere out there, but it seems, frankly, unlikely. So Arya runs. And she runs through the kitchen, she runs through the buttery. Isn't it amazing that medieval societies had a room dedicated to butter? Isn't that great? It would probably smell gross, actually. Like people who work in like food environments that make food often like get a bit put off by that kind of food. Well, Kata could tell you, actually. Probably Kata should say, like, Kata, do you still like baked goods after all the baking that you do, or is it just like not even food at a certain point? Because I'd imagine that if you worked in a buttery, I reckon a buttery would be worse. If you worked in a buttery, butter would be like even off-putting, or just not even remotely food based on like the amount of work you do with it. But anyway, the point is that George R. Martin manages to work in a food description to an otherwise unfood-related chase scene. I honestly think George Martin has a food description in almost every single chapter of this book, which is insane. He must always like write like before lunchtime or something, or maybe he's just always hungry, because it's ridiculous how much reference there is to food in this goddamn book. But anyway, so Arya runs, and she's scared, but she's repeating Sirio's mantras to try and keep herself together. And she's like, oh, which way should I run? Like, she could go up to the Tower of the Hand, or she could go, and she chooses to go the way that she thinks that they won't expect. So she goes down to, like, the cellars and, like, the dungeons and stuff. And she's like, oh, I need to get to Ned Stark. I need to get to my father. My father will protect me. My father will know what to do. Which, of course, is fucking heartbreaking, because right now, her father can't help her, because he's in a bloody dungeon at this point, I think. It's like how the saddest little stories in life, and it's always the ones about like the saddest ones are always like the dog who like travels 100 miles to try and find its owner, but its owner was dead. Like, that's always like the most heartbreak. Like, it's like in Futurama when like Fry's dog like waits for like decades until it dies for Fry, but Fry never comes. Like that. Those are always the saddest stories. It's the saddest stories are the ones with the animals, because the animals are so hopeful and believing in goodness and that things are going to be okay. But they don't understand realities, and they don't know when it's not going to happen. Arya in this situation is like a doggo looking for an owner who desperately wants to believe that everything's going to be okay, not knowing that it's not. And that is why Arya's story is so sad in this moment, I think. But anyway, she keeps on running, she's looking for her dad, and then through a window she sees that some blokes have been killed. There's a Stark man with grey clothes face down on the steps, dead. And she's like, oh shit, like something pretty serious is going down. People are fighting, Starks are dying, this is a problem. And she's trying to work out what's happening. And Arya, of course, has no real understanding of the political situation, but she's smart enough to know that when blokes are getting shivved, keep your head down, is what Arya knows. And she also remembers the conversation she overheard between Varys and Illyrio Mopatis down in the Red Keep basements, when they were talking about the Hand of the King dying. And she's like, wow, shit, something real is going on. She hears sounds of fighting in the background, and she remembers that Jaime had killed Jory and Will and Heward and all these blokes. So Arya doesn't have much information about the situation, but we see her drawing on the knowledge that she does have in order to try and inform her decisions. Like even though she's totally out of the loop here, but she does a really good job of like thinking through the information that she does have to try to figure out what's what. Arya is so practical and pragmatic and able to deal with difficult circumstances. But she is afraid because she thinks she is only a little girl with a wooden stick, alone and afraid. Hashtag heartbreaking. And she's trying to like sneak through the Red Keep and like try and get somewhere and like whoop whoop whoop, and she's trying to sneak through the shadows. She's going full sneak man. There's all these gold cloaks around, but she like jumps into a hay bale to try and evade them and all this stuff. And she sees Hullen, who's the master of horse at Winterfell. He's been stabbed like a gazillion times and he's like dying inside the stables. And Hullen says, he gives the classic like dying man's last words, and he says to Arya, "Oh, Arya Underfoot," which was like the cute nickname they had for her. "Oh, you have to go and warn your father," and then he dies. And the thing that I kind of like about that is that normally those sorts of dying famous last words are usually something profound and important. In this case, it's just something kind of wrong, because this horse guy is saying you've got to warn your father. I think Ned already knows that he's in hot water. Warning Ned won't help him now. So I like the fact that they've got a man's dying last words, which turn out to be wrong and unimportant, which is good. Like, you know, George Martin, the trope slayer, right? Like, that's a little example of, a little slight subversion of expectations. But there's all these dead Stark men in the stables, presumably because, of course, they were planning, Sansa and Arya were going to leave at midday today. They were going to leave to Winterfell to safety, but alas, they were too late. And Arya talks about how a lot of the dead people are people who she knew personally. They were important to Arya. So there was a groom who Arya had played with, and there's Desmond, one of Ned's warriors, who had promised to protect her father. So that promise failed. And she recalls how Desmond told Arya that every Northman is worth 10 of the Southern fighters, and the Northmen will protect them, and everything's going to be okay. And Arya feels betrayed by that, because, of course, as it turns out, that was not true. The Starks are not worth 10 of every Lannister fighter. They didn't keep everyone safe. And so Arya is so enraged by that, by the fact that Desmond was wrong when he said that everything would be okay, that she kicks Desmond's corpse in a sudden fury. Which is a fairly gnarly thing to do, going around kicking corpses. So that shows the extent of Arya's frustration with the way people have failed her. And that's like a recurring theme for Arya, is that she feels as though everyone around her has failed her, and so she can't trust them. She can't rely on anyone. She talks later in like Clash and Storm about how she's looking for a pack. She wants to be with a family. She wants to be around a group of people who she can rely on, who will keep her safe. And like for a moment, she thinks she finds that with like Gendry and Hot Pie, but you know, Gendry abandons her for the Brotherhood, and Hot Pie goes and joins that in. So Arya's constantly searching for people who she can believe and trust, but it feels like she can never find such people, so she's always stuck to be alone and alienated and fighting for her life herself, which is another heartbreaking layer to Arya's arc. So she's like, alright, I gotta get a plan together, I'm in the stable, I got a GTFO, I gotta make like a tree and get the fuck out of here, I gotta get a Nettie, I'll get a horse, I'll saddle him up, and I'll ride for the hills. I'll just fucking run, everything will be okay, I'll just run. But first, she sees a chest on the ground, full of her belongings and her clothes, which again, they were about to escape the city with all their stuff. So all of Arya's inventory is in this chest, but the chest has been knocked down and spilled across the ground, and all of the silks and all of the velvets and all of the nice clothings have been scattered across the dirt. Remember when they were about to leave Winterfell, and they were like packing to leave? And Arya was complaining how, Septa Mordain made me have to fold my clothes. I don't want to. That's not at all what Arya's voice sounds like. She says like Septa Mordain made her fold all of her clothes neatly, but she's like, what's the point of neatly folding all my clothes, because they're just going to get messed up anyway? Well, in a funny way, Arya's words are indeed proved right, because her pretty neatly folded clothes have been scattered across the dirt. So Arya was right, perhaps not in the exact way that she thought. And And so Arya's like, oh, I'll grab some stuff for what's useful. I'll grab, like, I've got this bracelet that's made of silver. I could sell that for money. And I better get some warm clothes because it's going to be cold outside. So I better get, like, Arya's so pragmatic. Like, you can't, like, it's hard to imagine Sansa doing something like this. I don't think Sansa would be pragmatic enough to go like, oh, I could get this jewelry to sell it, and then I need to do these things to look after myself. Arya's really good at doing that practical stuff. But then, while she's rummaging through her chest, she hears a voice. There she is, from behind her. And it's a stable boy with a pitchfork looking menacing. So it becomes apparent that this boy is like everyone's looking for Arya. Everyone's looking for the wolf girl right now. And this boy thinks that he can advance himself by capturing Arya. And he makes it pretty clear that he's a pretty nasty, threatening bloke. So he's an adversary for Arya. And this guy, like, I mean, in the same way that this is essentially Mega Man X level 1, this is like the lowest ranking, the lowest level, weakest bad guy who Mega Man has to fight with, because Mega Man's on his first level, he's not very strong, so the adversaries that he needs to face also need to be not very strong. So this is like the level 1 boss in Mega Man. This is like the weakest of Mega Man's opponents. This stable boy, he's just a dumb kid with a pitchfork. But he's an adversary for Arya, and he's the first hurdle that she has to overcome. So he approaches and tries to grab her, and she, full of fear and just like sudden action, just on reflex, she grabs Needle from inside the chest, her little sword, and drives it through the stable boy and kills him. So, from one perspective, this is like, oh, cool. So, like, Arya's, like, overcome her first challenge. She's beaten her first bad guy. You go, girl. But on the other hand, she's just murdered a child. She's a child, and she just murdered a child. Which I think most people can agree is not a great thing. I also think it's interesting that the stable boy looks at Arya with accusing eyes after being run through with her sword. Accusing eyes. That's the same term that's used to describe Melara, who was the young girl who was murdered by Cersei when Cersei was very young. It was an important part of Cersei's origin story that she murdered one of her friends, a young child, because it was all about, like, Maggie the Frog's prophecy, and also, like, Cersei was angry that Melara had a crush on Jaime and all this stuff. But, like, it's a pretty crazy thing that Cersei, as a child, murdered a child, and that was kind of a defining moment to her. That was kind of the beginning of her being villainous, you know? And Arya has done quite a similar thing. Arya, when she is very young, murders another child, and that sort of leads her down a path of being murderous, a dark path. Bad stuff is done by Arya. And so I think it's very deliberate that the stable boy is described as having accusing eyes, just like Melara had accusing eyes. Both Cersei and Arya have done a similar bad thing. And then Arya, after she kills the stable boy, has the realization that, like, oh, it's probably not going to be all that easy to just ride out of here. They're probably going to close all the gates. They're probably going to lock down this place. They're probably going to be ordered not to let anyone out, which is probably quite true. So Arya realizes that she needs to find another way out of the castle, and she remembers a couple of Arya chapters ago, remember when she went down into the basement and she overheard Illyrio and Varys, and she managed to exit the Red Keep through one of the sewers. Arya figures that is probably her ticket out of here. So she decides to go down to the dungeons again and then go out through the sewers. And so she heads out of the stables and she hears there's still fighting going on around. So she's trying to be really sneaky, but she realizes in order to get to the basement, she needs to pass through like an open square, like an open space that's being watched over by some of the gold cloaks. And she's like, well, shit, I don't know whose side the gold cloaks are on. We know from last chapter that the gold cloaks are very much on the crown side and against the Starks. But I was like, shit, I'm going to have to cross, like there's no way around it. In order for me to escape through the sewer, I need to pass through this open area. And the open area is being watched by gold cloaks. So I really can't get through here without being seen. So she's like, all right, instead of trying to sneak my way through, I'm just going to walk my way through. I'm just going to pretend that I'm meant to be here. I'm just going to look like I know what I'm doing. When in doubt, just pretend that you're meant to be there. And so she's really scared, but she's like, all right, I can do this. And she hears the voice of Sirio Farrell telling her to be calm. And so she walks across the yard slowly, 1 foot ahead of the other, as if she had all the time in the world, and she stifles all of her terror, and she doesn't even look up at the gold cloaks, because she knows that if she looks at the gold cloaks, she'd wet herself. So she's scary, but she overcomes her fear, and she manages to cross the yard, and no one accosts her. A lot of Arya's conflict internally is over, like, fear. It's not just about, like, fighting good. It's about her emotional state, and it's about her overcoming her fears and her anxieties and being able to control herself. Which probably makes a lot of sense given, she's a 10-year-old girl. She hasn't had a lot of opportunity to learn to conquer her fear. But a lot of her arc is about that sort of self-control. And it's about the way that, like, in order to control your fear and to not be afraid and to act decisively and purposefully and don't be swayed by your emotions, that requires you to suppress your identity and your humanity. Because it's human to be afraid, and it's human for your expectations to color your perceptions. But in order for Arya to become the faceless assassin that she eventually is, she needs to become no one. She needs to take away her identity. So it's about how, like, on the one hand, you can become more powerful and more competent and more effective by being less emotional and being less yourself. But being less emotional and being less yourself is being less human. So there's a profound cost to the sorts of empowerment that Arya feels. And that's why I think it's a little bit bad the way the show displays Arya, where Arya's like, ooh, wow, she's such a badass, she can fight swords real good, woo, and you just know that in season 7 she's gonna, like, come back to Winterfell and she's gonna meet up with Sansa and Bran, and they're all just gonna hug and dance around and be happy, and it'll be like nothing ever changed. But in the books, that's not how it's gonna be. In the books, Arya's changed, Arya's damaged, Arya is less human, Arya is less Arya. And, maybe she will get to return to her Arya Stark identity in some way, but not easily, because Arya's story is about dehumanization and trauma and stuff that doesn't just get erased, because she's become more powerful, she's become more able, but at the cost of becoming less herself. And Arya passes through a sept. There's a sept in the Red Keep, and she steals a couple of candles from the sept. Arya figures the gods won't mind if she borrows a couple of candles. Arya does not have a lot of respect for the gods of the seven, for the faith of the seven. She's more interested, if anything, in the old gods, but even that to a limited extent. So she crawls through a window, and then she creeps down into the basement, and it's dark, but she lights the candle. And last time she came down here, she was scared by all of the dragon skulls along the walls in the basement and stuff. That used to be frightening to her, but no longer. She calls them monsters, but she's not afraid of them anymore. So Arya has leveled up, and she's not afraid of what previously frightened her. And Arya's got a needle in her hand, and she feels better when she's armed. So that's another thing that Arya's taught in this early book. It's that violence and weaponry can make her feel more safe and secure when no other person can. She feels like she can't rely on other people. She can only rely on steel. And she's left-handed, by the way. All the weirdos are left-handed. And so she's going through the basement, and she remembers a stable boy who she just murdered. She doesn't think about him much. Like, you'd think that if you murdered another child when you were a child, that would stick in your head. But Arya does not think about this stable boy many times throughout the rest of the series. She's got other kills to think about in the end. But while she's down here in the darkness, she's reminded of the crypts at Winterfell, where that most mysterious of locations in Winterfell, the place where all the old Starks are buried. And she remembers one time she went down there with her family, with Robb and Rickon and Sansa and Bran, and Robb was, like, trying to, like, spook them out. Robb was talking about, like, ooh, there are nasty things down here. Down in the crypts, the dead walk. And after Robb said that, a spirit of the dead leapt out, pale white and moaning for blood. And Sansa ran away, but Arya stood her ground and punched the spirit. Which just right there tells you everything you need to know about Arya. when Arya is faced with an inhuman monster, when Arya is faced with death, when Arya is faced with insurmountable odds, you know what Arya does? She punches it, which is just great. You just got to spit in the face of the Grim Reaper some days, and that's what Arya does. But of course, this particular pale white spirit moaning for blood was just Jon, covered with flour. So it was just a prank, bro. This was just a Westerosi prank channel. They were just trying to do Arya a spookers. They were trying to do Arya a frighten. They did Arya a frighten by pulling an old. It was just a prank, bro. And they all laugh about it. Sansa, of course, just went and ran off, but Arya and the boys have a good laugh about it. So that's kind of cool. And so the memory makes Arya smile, and she decides that she's going to go home. She's going to go home to Winterfell, to her family, the Starks, and then everything is going to be okay. Which, of course, could not be further from the truth. 4 books later, Arya is still on her own. She's not in Winterfell. She's, in fact, in another continent, in a foreign city, being trained as an assassin in a death cult. This is not what Arya had in mind at this early stage, because the Fellowship has been broken. She can't go back home. Everyone's scattered. Everything's thrown into war. Everything's thrown into disarray. And she can never quite return to her Stark identity. In fact, the rest of her arc is in a lot of ways about being separated from her Stark identity. So things only really get worse from here for Arya Stark. So on that cheery note, I think that concludes that chapter and concludes this episode of Alt Shrift X's Game of Thrones Abridged. I hope you enjoyed. While we're here, I think we can do a quick Q&A. I'll just grab one question. I'll just chuck your questions in there. I'll have a glance and I'll grab one question and I'll answer that. It's not so much Q&A as well. No, it's a Q&A. All right, you've probably got a question up now, so I'll have a look. Favorite chapter. One of my favorite chapters is the chapter that we read a while ago between Ned Stark and Cersei Lannister in the God's Wood. I think that was maybe 10 chapters ago or thereabouts. But it was a chapter where Cersei, Ned is confronting Cersei and saying I know the truth about all your incest and shit. And Cersei's well, I own up to that. And they have this conversation about the nature of power and the nature of doing what's right for your family, and it's this wonderful clash between the personalities of Cersei and Ned, and it humanizes both of those characters, and both of those characters are understandable in that moment, but they're also opposed and they're also in conflict. And I think that is a really cool chapter. But yeah, anyway, we got to finish this stream, I think, unless we fucking stream all day. I think this was a fun episode. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being here. We will do more of these in the future. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.